No, because I can still say it too. First filming session of the year, and it almost didn't happen. But also, it's technically me looking back on what I did last year. Actually, mainly the lessons I've learned last year. Hi, I'm your local internet friend, aka Toki, and as I said earlier, this video is going to be me looking back at what I was able to accomplish and the lessons that I've learned from last year. I was thinking about whether I should actually do like a December update, but outside of reviewing the songs that I created last year, which was a good idea for me to have done before I decided to export them from GarageBand. It's similar to looking over and reading over your essay or PowerPoint presentation before you turn it in or before you present it. There we go. And the main lesson that I ended up learning last year is like not necessarily something I didn't know, but knowing and understanding are two separate things. In order for me, at least the way that I'm looking at it, in order for me to understand something, I would have to have something to apply it to. Similar to how some pieces of advice doesn't really make sense until you've had an experience where the advice suddenly makes sense. The main thing that I wanted to focus on last year was moving on. After taking an entire year to do the Luna's Vision, the Greatest Illusion project, and using that as a way of helping myself process everything that I've experienced up till like the last video I made for that project, the next question I had to figure out was what do I do what do I do now? Which direction do I go? I basically spent the entirety of last year trying to figure that one out. Which apparently, from what I have heard from other people and how they've experienced people who haven't done this, it seems to be something that a lot of people have a hard time with. Now, I think one of my personal theory as to why that is simply because of like how people are expressing and understanding the whole concept of moving on from trauma. A lot of people tend to use the word healing when it comes to trauma, or at least when it comes to traumatic experiences and having to move past them. But sometimes when they say healing from your trauma, it almost sounds like it kind of gives off the energy of eventually getting over it or moving on from it, letting go of it is eventually getting over it. So that's mainly the reason as to why I don't use the term healing when it comes to trauma. I use the term processing because it's not just like the trauma or the traumatic experience, but it's like figuring out your center afterwards. And that requires for you to like comb through information and stuff. And while the term healing gives off the vibe of letting it go and acting as if it didn't happen, the art of getting over it, the term processing keeps in mind that there will be residual effects, but those have the potential of disappearing in due time. It doesn't set up a specific timeline for it to not affect you, especially if it has been something that happened, especially for people with CPTSD. That's what I wanted to end that one with. What I specifically wrote down in my notes is processing trauma is like going in circles, or more like a spiral. Eventually, you'll get out of it. But moving on, or the act of moving on from after processing your trauma, is harder because it forces you to take accountability and action. It forces you to think about what you would want to do, what you can do, what you should do, and like honestly what you actively feel like doing. And the human brain does not like having to put in more effort than is necessary. So, as I explained, the whole processing trauma is like feeling like you're going around in circles, but in reality, it's more of a spiral that goes down or out. Your brain is, if you keep going over and over and over and over again, you do risk essentially putting yourself in a mental thought loop, and your brain just gets stuck in that until you're able to like get yourself out of it, or someone else comes in to help you get out of it. And from my personal experience, not just the people that I've interacted with, but like watching other people that I don't actually interact with, or listening to other people's experiences with people that they interact with. Some people choose to not really think about what happened to them simply because they were able to say it was bad, it wasn't right, and that's all that they need to know. I specifically typed up, and most people just give up because it's too hard, but I think that is grossly simplifying the actual issue. Most people choose to not quote unquote process their trauma because they believe they already know what they need to know about it. But then it's something that ends up affecting their other relationships. So obviously they haven't, you know, actually got over it. As I said earlier, the act of moving on requires you to stop the mental cycle and choose a direction to go in. Essentially, it requires self-awareness and a deep understanding of one's desires. And while it was relatively easy to explain, it is also just easier said than done. But doing that type of hard mental work essentially frees you. Not necessarily from anything in particular, but it frees up your mental space and lightens your mental load, if it explains it the best. But all of the many lessons that I've learned from essentially focusing on the act of moving on was like why learning how to play an instrument was so difficult for me, and how to handle going about that if I choose to do so. Why trying to force myself to create things was so difficult and honestly not a good idea. And why it was important for me to not just break that cycle, but break other I want to say generational cycles, but like break away from other generational cycles. There we go. And last but not least, what it's actually like to support yourself in pursuing your own passions at the same time, and what it feels like to be supported. Under normal circumstances, by the end of the year, I would be questioning, what did I even do? And one of the things that I wanted to keep this YouTube channel for was essentially to document exactly what I did every month. But just the act of having to keep in mind what I'm doing, what I planned on doing versus what I actually did, just to make these videos, that also helped. Plus, I ended up making a couple of extra videos that weren't actually update videos, which kind of reminded me as to why I changed the name of my channel to Local Internet Friend. Because I love having knowledge, but I also love talking about things. And that was what this channel was mainly supposed to be about, me essentially expressing the things that I would want to talk about. Mainly because I don't really have people around me that would want to listen, or at least that would want to listen every time I have something that I would want to talk about. Like at the start of last year, I decided to do an entire deep dive on Eminem's discography. It almost feels like I'm having to process his trauma. Which is the reason why I haven't finished that yet. The last bit I want to at least share in this video is I do have plans, not just for this channel in particular, but I'm also planning on figuring out other things. So until my next video, this is Toki, your local internet friend, for the most part, signing off.